So, what I believe we need to do is focus on individualism, an individualistic perspective. From an individualistic perspective, inequality is irrelevant. We don't care. The only thing we care about is freedom. The only thing we care about is to be left alone so that we can produce and create to our own ability. Individualist, self-interested, confident people don't resent other people's success. They admire it. When I see somebody who's really, really wealthy, I go, cool. They must have made my life better in some way. Because that's the only way you get rich, is by making people's lives better. By writing a book that I'm willing to pay for, by creating a product that I'm willing to buy. And even if I don't buy it, my neighbor's buying it, so they're better off. So, you know, we're all kind of better off in one way or another. It's the only way people become rich, in a free market. So what we fight for is for freedom. Freedom for poor people, freedom for middle class people, freedom for rich people. One of the people in this panel that I was going around with said, we got to fight, you know, we really got to really care about poor people. It's all about poor people. And no, it's not really all about poor people, because the solution to poor people is the same solution for everybody. If you care about poor people, if you want to solve the problem of poverty, the solution is the same solution to all the other problems, and that is more freedom. Thank you. Good.
But we don't have a free market.
We don't. We don't have free markets, so there are clearly distortions. But I don't agree with many libertarians who argue, oh, in the world we live in today, most of the wealth is owned by cronyism. That is just not true.
Back that up. I say,
Okay.
okay, you got the Bill Gates, you got the Steve Jobs, may you rest in
Okay,
peace.
let's go down one.
But
Let's go down.
Let's
go down the list. Let's take the Forbes 400. Let's go down the list. You go down the list, and you see time and time again they're entrepreneurs. Or then you get to the Walton family. Sam Walton, real entrepreneur, wealth creator, not crony. Didn't create any cronies, and now he's got 4 kids. You could argue they don't deserve it, but it was his money. He gave it to them. None of our business. But the wealth is being created by an actual business. I don't see anybody from General Electric, which is a crony company, on that list, right? I see entrepreneurs, particularly in Silicon Valley, or other places around the world. No, that if anything, these people who are on that list are being restrained from being richer by cronyism, because their competitors are restraining them. No?
In the UK, there's the Sunday Times 1000 rich list,
Yeah.
and 900 of them are bankers or property owners.
Well, let me say something about bankers, because you know, the hatred to banking that seems to be universal, including among libertarians, I find quite upsetting, because I think it's very wrong. I don't think there's a more important, noble, and important and significant job than banking in a capitalist economy. Capitalism, there's no capitalism without capital, and therefore without the bankers. Wall Street does an amazing job. Yes, it's crony. It's crony because government regulators sit in your office next door to you, and everything you do has to be approved by them. So yeah, you're going to try to bribe them to get something across so that you can actually do your job? Sure. But to blame Wall Street for the problems rather than the government for the problems. And why do they make a lot of money? You know what? In the old days, before cronyism, in the 19th century and early 20th century, bankers were some of the richest people on the planet. J.P. Morgan, in America, I'm not talking about, you know, Europe, where you could argue there was cronyism. J.P. Morgan was rich, not because he was a crony. J.P. Morgan was rich because financiers add more value than anybody else in an economy, and therefore make more money than anybody else in the economy. Now, granted, a lot of the people today on Wall Street are gaining money because the system is rigged. The solution is not to argue about inequality. The solution is to unrig the system. Let's unrig the system. And the way to unrig the system is not to blame the bankers. The way to unrig the system is to realize who has the power. Bureaucracy and the politicians. If we want to get rid of cronyism, you shrink government. The smaller the government, the less cronyism is.
You said there's no cronyism.
I didn't say there's no cronyism. I said most of the wealth out there that rich people have is not a result of cronyism. It's not.
But you talked to 400 people. Look, I'm a hedge fund guy,
right? I take advantage of inefficiencies in the market. And some
But
of those...
they don't.
Let me finish. Yes, they do.
No, they don't.
No, you don't understand.
No, they don't.
Of course they do.
Yaron is speaking.
But you're making a fallacious statement.
I'm not. I'm making a statement
No,
from
no.
a background of a PhD in finance
Oh,
and
okay.
as a practicing private equity.
Most hedge funds don't do what you just said.
Okay, that's not true. But the point is this. Some of those inefficiencies in the marketplace are created by government regulations and by government controls, there's no question. So what? So I'm not supposed to make money off of those? So my point is this, look, you might say the wealth that there's 60% of it is a consequence of cronyism. I think it's more like 20 or 30% of it is a consequence of cronyism. We both agree it's too much. And the way to get rid of it is to shrink government, is to reduce the power of government. Microsoft is the best example of this. Look, in the early 1990s, Microsoft spent $0 on lobbying. Literally zero. They had no lobbyists in Washington. They had no presence in Washington. There were a number of stories from that period about this. And they're brought in front of Congress, in front of the Senate. And Orrin Hatch, the Republican senator from the state of Utah, yells at them, you guys have to stop lobbying. You got to build a building in Washington, D.C. You've got to have a presence here. You've got to bribe me, in other words. Right? Microsoft says explicitly, the guy in the hearing says, look, we're not interested. You leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. And he walks away. And that's it. Right? 6 months later, knock on the door. Right? Justice Department, we're suing you for antitrust violations. And what was the sin? What was the sin? They gave Internet Explorer away for free. But in the end, they didn't drop the case, because in the end, there was a government supervisor at Microsoft for 15 years. And those 15 years are exemplar of no innovation. Bill Gates left Microsoft because it became a boring, bureaucratic, ridiculous place to work. Plus, he had to redeem himself by doing charity. God forbid he should continue making money. But he had to leave Microsoft because it became, and I know people who work there and say, before the antitrust case, and it's a completely different company, because everything became bureaucratized, everything had to go through a government supervisor, and it destroyed the company. Now they're trying to remake themselves, because finally, the government person that the court appointed to sit at Microsoft were left, I think, 4 or 5 years ago, and since then they've been trying to remake. You see it with Apple. Apple had this iTunes issue with the government over the e-books. The government appointed a person to sit at the Apple headquarters to review every contract they signed relating to iTunes and approve it or not approve it, to make sure they didn't violate antitrust laws. Okay, so how much do you think Microsoft spends on lobbying today? Tens of millions of dollars. They've got this beautiful building, it's right behind the Cato building. It's one building down, about equal distance from the Capitol and the White House, so they can get anywhere they need to quickly. They've got an army of lobbyists. That's how you get cronyism. J.P. Morgan didn't want to have anything to do with the government until they brought him in front of hearings. I forget the names of the hearings, but in front of hearings. And they lambasted him after he'd saved the U.S. economy in 1907 from collapse. How dare he, right? A private banker saved the U.S. economy. They brought him in front of hearings. So what he ended up cutting a deal with the government because he knew they would destroy him. And the deal ended up being the Federal Reserve and ultimately banking regulations. But the person with the gun is the guy pushing this. What we need to do is shrink the ability of the government to use that gun. To only where it's appropriate, which is only in self-defense. Only to catch crooks and fraudsters.